Hey folks, I'm working at the router table today and I'm going to show you how to put this kind of edge banding on here. Let me show you in this camera view right here. You can see the profile of the edge banding right there. It's a piece of oak, and this is just regular old sandy plywood. And I would say cheap plywood. It would be cheap, except that all the plywood I buy now is expensive, just because things have gone up so much. But anyway, I'm going to put this edge banding on here. You can see that it's thicker than normal. I wanted that because this is an oak front. This is what will be seen by the persons, and then books will be on top, and so you won't see much of the shelf. Anyway, but I've got 4 of these things to do. Well, actually, this is one of them I've done already. But I'm going to show you how this is done with these bits right here. These are the edge banding bits. They got 2 different profiles. This one right here will cut into that plywood. It'll make that groove into that plywood right there with these bits. That's a 4mm thick tongue on that. And this one is the opposite of the profile. They fit perfectly together, just like that. And this will be used to make the edge on the oak piece right here. That's going to be the edge banding, and you can see how that's done right here. So what we're going to do first is cut the plywood, and then we're going to cut the oak. By the way, the oak is slightly thicker than this piece of plywood. Let me see if I can show you like this. Okay, so there's the plywood and there's the oak. The oak is thicker. I'm not going to try to plane that oak down to the thickness of the plywood. You could do that, but this oak is not. It's got a little bit of a bow in it, not bad, but it'll be straightened out once I press it into the plywood right here. And so I want it thick, but I'm going to flush trim it with a flush trim router bit once I finish. So I want it to overlap both ends of the plywood. So it requires different setups on both of these bits right here, because 2 different pieces of wood, and then I'll be able to put them together. I'll show you all the techniques as we go. Now this is I'm using these rollers from Jessam. They press down onto the wood, and they keep the wood forced up against the fence as well as down against the table, and so that'll help me through this process. I'm going to put this insert in here once I install this first router bit. So this first router bit is the groove part of it that goes for the plywood. So let me put this piece of plywood away, and we'll have the actual plywood that I'm going to be using on this. And I've actually drawn a center line on this piece of plywood. I've already done that. That's a perfectly centered line right there, because I'll need that to get. I want this tongue to fit exactly on this piece of plywood right here in the middle of that line right there. So that's a trick to do. And then so now I've got the bit down in the collet right here, and so I'm going to put the collet into the router. Start tightening it up, and I'll need to lower it down once I've done that. So let me get my wrench. I'll get it raised up here. Let me move this up out of the way so that this camera can see this little bit right here. So move the plywood out of the way for a minute, and I'll tighten this bit up. I press in to get this locked, and then I'll use my wrench to give it a little squeeze right there. And so now it's up too high, so I pull out my my turning knob here. I've got to get this down out of the way again, and so we're going down. Put it down a little bit more so it doesn't hit. And once I start getting close, I'm going to put this this ring back around it. I've got 2 dust collection units that I'm going to be using to collect dust on here. This one right here will pick up all the dust from the top, and then I've got this hose coming down over here, which will pick up the cabinet down here. There's a cabinet down here that collects dust as well. So it pulls down and pulls up on there. So this little ring now, I'm ready to put it on to see, to get an exact height. All right, I'm going to pause right now because my compressor just came on. So all right, so this tightens up the that hole, and I've got to get this plywood now ready. All right, there's the line, so I can put this plywood right here, and I've got a ways to come down. I hope you can see this line on here, and so I've got to roll it down some. So I'm using that plywood. This is the edge I'm going to be cutting, but I'm putting it sideways to this because I want to use that to kind of gauge it down. So I'm lowering the bit, and I'm just going to guess to begin with, and then I'm going to turn the bit. This bit, I don't know whether you can tell it or not, but let me move this up so the camera doesn't get in the way of the camera here. This edge is kind of a thin edge that backs up that little tongue right there. And that's right in the center. So I can use that edge to make sure that I'm on that line. So it looks like I'm slightly above the line. So I'm going to continue to lower it until it is dead center on that line. So that serves as a pretty good little way to gauge this. Once you get your center line on here, you can use that piece coming out as the center line of this. Now, I've got to make the fence come in and out because as I'm cutting this thing, when I cut, I don't want to cut this profile so much that it doesn't also touch the other end of the yeah, you can see me up here. So as it's coming off this side, it touches this side as well, which means it'll have made the cut. And I still need that edge untouched. I want to come as close to that edge as possible with the cutter, but not remove any of that edge so that it still rubs up against here. That's going to be important in a couple of ways on this thing. So I've got to make sure that I've got my front and back planned. So I'm putting the bout a bit where the cutters are even with each other. And I'm going to use this little steel rule that I've got right here, a small one, and I'm going to put the plywood down on the bench, and I want to make sure that it's touching that. I don't want it to touch. I want to move the fence forward towards me so that it just passes that piece of plywood. And I've got a little. Can you see that over here? Yeah, I'm reaching. You can see my hand up here. I'm reaching this little adjustment. This is a fine tuning adjustment knob. And yes, these are loose. So these are tight back here. The fine tune adjuster makes it loose. So I'm going to move this fence forward a little bit. All right, so now it's past that. And I got to get my head in the way here because I've got to see. I don't know that my eyesight is good enough to be able to tell. So I'm going to go back the other way until it touches again. All right, now it's touching. So I come back out. I turn it just a little bit, still touching, like this. All right, now it's no longer touching, so I'm going to back off just a tad. Okay, so it's not. If it's touching the blade, just kissing it just a tiny little bit, I think that will be just fine. It'll ride up against this fence. What happens if you do cut the edge of the plywood as you're coming down here, and when most of your thing gets on this side, it's going to push into this blade a little tighter because it's now referencing this. Particularly when you get past the edge of that fence, it'll make it a nice bump in there, and you don't want to make that happen. So now it's time to set these guides so they press down against the table. Actually, I don't want to do that yet. I want to move the fence in. So I'm going to, since I've got the position of the fence this way set, and I've got the position of the bit up and down set, I'm ready to lock all this down. And I'm going to move the fences in so the dust collection works pretty well. So I'm going to move that to about right there. Tighten those two knobs. Put this one out of the way. And move this one into right here. Get it fairly close. Tighten those two. Turn the bit to make sure it doesn't touch. It's freewheeling, that's fine. So, now I use these. I must really crank down on it last time I used it. Here we go. All right, so now this is this roller is touching the plywood. I want the plywood to be pressed hard against the fence. And this roller is a silicone rubber roller. And what it has the effect of is it won't let you roll it back because I've got dust on it. I'm gonna use a little spit to clean that off right here so I can demonstrate this. As you're pushing in, it's supposed to be pushed down hard enough to where it won't come back. So I'm pushing down with my thumb and then tightening it up. All right, see now it won't come back. So that solves kickback problem. So you got to roll it forward. But what this roller does, it's cambered a little bit towards the fence. So as you're rolling it this way, it pulls it towards the fence and pushes it down against the table. So these things are good. So I've done that side. I'm going to do this side over here. Open it up, press it down hard with my finger. Okay, so now this will catch one side and the other one will catch the other side as it goes by. Okay, I think I'm ready to make the cut now. Okay, so I'm going to turn my dust collection on, I'm going to turn the router on, I'm going to make the cut, and then that will be the plywood done. So, dust collection. And I'm not going to talk. I can talk over this one. Once I turn the router on, I won't be able to talk over it. So I'm not going to talk during this period of time. I may go back and rehearse things a little bit, or I may do a voiceover once I do it. Okay, so I've made that profile cut. I'm looking to see if there's any edges right here. It looks like I still have a slight, no, that's not. I think I'm pretty sharp on both those edges right there. There may be a flat, just barely on the last little veneer, and it's very thin veneer. But that's what was holding it against the fence. So I don't know whether you noticed or not, but it was hard up against the fence here before the cut, and it was also hard up against the fence here after the cut. And so now I've got it perfectly straight. I don't feel any bumps or whatever in here as it comes off. And so I'll be able to glue that one in there just fine. So now it's time to switch bits. And so we're going to move these things out of the way. And I'm gonna need to move it in and out, so I'm gonna loosen up the fence, keeping this tight back in the back, the micro adjuster. Move these things out of the way. Fences, that is, move it out of the way. And now I'll be able to, I don't want to loosen that. So I'm going to set this piece of plywood aside, get this piece of wood over here, and get this bit right here that I'm going to be putting in there. So I got to raise it up. Oh, I got to remove it first. Remove the little insert there. And I've got a long side and a short side on these things right here. If I put the long side down, that makes it easier to pull it up out of there. And so you go in the opposite direction of what you think on these things. Okay, so that's, I'll put that back in just a minute, and I'll raise it up. So I can remove that bit and replace it with this big old bit right here. It's a very heavy bit. By the way, the name of this bit is a 60-degree edge banding bit set. So it comes in this little box from a Montool, and an expensive carbide bit, but it's worth it for the effect that you're going to get, particularly when you want to I don't like using edge band tape that you have to press on with an iron and stuff like that. It doesn't always stay on very well, and I think it looks a little contrived on here. This gives you a real nice heavy piece of hardwood oak in this particular case on the front edge of that plywood. All right, so I've taken this one out. I'll put it down over here, keep it from rolling off, and put this one in here in place. Raise it up just a tad instead of the bottoming out. And now I'm going to tighten it down. I should have tightened it by hand first before I use the wrench. All right, now I'm tightening it down with the wrench. That ought to be enough. And now I'm ready to lower the bit, put the zero clearance plate back up. All right, and this is going to be a tricky little piece to set up as well. It's just the opposite of the other one. I'm going to have to make sure that the edges, since this is a different thickness, the edges, each edge, sharp edge of this oak comes in contact with the bits here. So the edges of this are going to be up against there, and I want them both to be touching with it sitting on the floor. I think I'm going to flip this over and use that edge right there. That's because it's got a slight bow in it, and I want to be able to press down on it. Okay, here's the zero clearance thing. I'll still have to lower it some more, but I'm going to go ahead and put this in place so that it's ready. All right, and now I use the short sticks sticking out here to tighten it up. And you don't go clockwise to tighten, you go counterclockwise to tighten, which is the exact opposite of the way every other screw in the world works. And I've got a ways to go to get it down. I've got to move the fence in and out. I'm just getting this close right now. If I raise it up. can tell that it's not touching the, I'm going to keep holding it until it slides up and touches both sides, and I can tell. Notice if I raise it up, and it's now, let me get this out of the way so your camera can see from over here. So right now it's not touching, I mean, it's not touching the top side, but it is touching the bottom side. I'm going to raise this one up too to get it out of the way so I can move this closer right here. So you see it touches the bottom cutter first. And so as I lower it down, I'm going to kind of push it forward so it'll ride up. At a certain point where that'll keep moving. All right, so it looks to be, I'm going to get up close and look. Go down a little bit more. This thing is still in the way. Okay. I can see that it's not touching. I'm lowering the bit, and I'm making it, as I lower the bit, that I'm going to keep this up against the bit because it'll be moving away from it at the bottom and towards it at the top. I'm trying to find a clean edge where I can see if it's touching both sides at the same time. No, it's still not touching. I gotta lower a little bit more. All right, it looks like it's touching top and bottom at the same time. That's what you need. That the chamfered edge on both of them. That way the tongue of this thing will be dead center, and it'll give me the width of this. It'll be partially sticking out on both sides. I definitely don't want it inside the edge of the. Excuse me. Let me get down here where you can see me. I definitely don't want this, I want it overlapping the plywood on both sides. I definitely don't want it below the plywood surface at all, because then the flush trim would be pointless and it'll look terrible. So we'll go with that. All right, so I've got the bit height set. Now I've got to set the depth of the fence back and forth. And I do that with this other little tool I had. Ah, here it is. Same color as the tabletop in here. And there is a little ball bearing, and I thought you were supposed to reference against the ball bearing, but not. What you want to do is you want to make sure that the edge of the fence is exactly at the point where the deepest part of the cut's going to be. Not touching it, but just off of it, just a little bit. So I'm going to get this close over here. Get this close over here. Make sure the bit can turn. That's good. And then I'm going to tighten these fences up right here. And then I'm going to take this. Looks like it's not touching. I need to get it where it's at its apex right there, the cutter blade. I can't tell if it's cutting or not. So I'm going to move the fence this way, which will give me more depth on there. All right, now I definitely know it's not touching. Go back in. It's barely touching. Now let me tell you why this is important. If it were cutting into that little tongue that sticks out, it'd be the same problem. I would be rubbing the entire board rubs against this fence, and as it's coming off the cutter at the last little bit here, the tongue is really not touching the fence. And once you get off this back fence over here, this thing drops down and makes a nice little bump in the thing. So you don't want that tongue to be cut by that cutter at the back at all. So, but I still want it as long as it can be so that it clears. And it feels like it's touching just slightly. So I'm going to move the fence this way just a little bit. All right, now it's not touching, and it's still pretty close. So we still got a good long tongue on there. I don't want it to bottom out because of the glue squeeze out. All right, so this one gonna get pressed down hard here. You know what? I'm gonna lock this down since I know that I've got the bit height set. Now everything's locked in except for these rollers here. So I'm gonna press down on the roller. All right, so that's working. And now I need to press down on this roller right here, let it drop and hit the thing here. I'm gonna press down on it hard. Basically what I'm doing, I'm squeezing that silicone wheel right there a little bit. And now it won't come back, but it will go forward. And so, okay, so that's the edge I'm gonna cut because that's the edge I measured against. And I think we're ready to go with it now. All right, so turning everything on. Okay, there's no bump over here because the tongue was touching on both sides of the fence. That worked perfectly. Looking at it from the profile side here, it looks like it's nice and even here. So I think when I put it down in the piece of plywood right here, that it will be proud on both sides. And sure enough it is. I can feel an edge on both sides right there. This is not how long I'm going to keep it. I'm going to rip it off where I've got maybe 3/8 of an inch sticking out. I'll measure one of the other ones I did, and so it's the same. Okay, so I think that's ready to go. I think the way this thing fits in here is good, and I'll be ready to glue it up. You can see I've got it a little long right here, but I'll cut it off on the table saw. I'm going to try to leave one side, one edge close right there. So you can see a little bit of a gap right there. The tongue is a little short. It means that I had the fence out a little bit further than I needed. I should have left it closer. but I can use some wood filler. Actually, you'll never see that piece right there because that'll be the inside the, you know what? It's all the way down. It's closer than I thought. All right, so the next step is to, we're done with the router now. So that should be ready to go. We're ready to glue it up. And then I'm going to cut this piece. As a matter of fact, I think I'm going to cut the piece first because otherwise this will be sitting up top and after it glues up, it'll be sitting on a higher edge here than it would here when I'm higher edge here than it would here when I'm ripping on the table saw. And that wouldn't be good. So I don't mind ripping once I've done the flush trim, but I can't do the flush trim with all of this wood here. So I'm going to rip it first and then glue it and then flush trim it and then cut the ends off so that it's nice and square on here. And so that'll be the next step. So I'm gonna move some cameras around when we do the table saw cut. And then when we do the glue up, we'll move the cameras around again as well. So, see it in a little bit. Okay, folks, I have this set up to cut off this piece, this edge right here, about the same width as this one right here. And so basically, I just put this up against the blade slightly, and then I'm adjusting the fence back and forth until this was even with that one. So that'll give me the same cut. This will fall off. I don't want to do it this way because it would have too much of a chance to buckle up. So I want it to cut loose. So I want this solid piece of wood right here. And I'm going to use this push stick. This is only sitting very slightly above the edge of that wood. And so I'll be able to cut into this push stick and cut it safely like that. So let me turn on the dust collector. By the way, that's the same dust collector that was being used for the router table dust port. I've got a different hose, so I had to switch hoses. I had to switch the hoses over here to the table saw, which is where it normally stays. I use the router table far less than the table saw, obviously. So dust collector on. Okay, that worked out pretty good. That'll be enough to do the flush trim on there. I may end up cutting it slightly a little bit more, but it looks good and it's ready to go. And we'll do the glue up now. Okay, folks, we're ready to do the glue up now. And so I've got this panel mounted on my bench here, and I'm gonna try to be flush on one edge right there, just so it's easier to cut this part off on the table saw when I get ready. Folks, I gotta tell you, this is some poor quality plywood, but it was all I could get, and it's just the way things are right now with supply chain issues. You can't even get Baltic birch plywood because of the war and stuff like that. But anyway, it's also very porous right here, so I've got to put plenty of glue on here. Here's my little glue cup. You can see I've got some glue in there, and yeah, you can see my face. I didn't see it. Okay, so I've got some glue in there, and I've got my glue stick right here, so I can start spreading glue on this plywood right here. I'm going to stand up and do it. These inner plies are really porous, and so it's going to soak up the glue pretty quickly. I don't want to get too much in that tongue and groove, or the groove part of that tongue and groove thing on here, because I don't want it to bottom out. I don't want it to get under a lot of hydraulic pressure as I'm trying to clamp it shut. So, but I do want to get plenty of glue up on those edges. So I've done that. So now I'm going to sit back down and start spreading glue on the oak right here. I think it's important to glue both surfaces, particularly in this kind of situation, just so that both surfaces are wet with glue. Doesn't have to be much glue. It's just got to be enough to make a bond. You want a little bit of squeeze out, just as confirmation that you've got plenty of glue. And if it does squeeze out on this, I'm not worried about it, because the flush trim will take care of all that squeeze out, and then I'll sand it as well. I just want to make sure that every piece of this oak that's going to go in this joint is wet with a thin layer of glue. This is fast setting glue. The clamp time is around 10 minutes, and then you can't use it that fast, but the glue will definitely harden by that point in time. Now, as I'm pressing this down, I'm going to try to make it flush on this side over here. All right, let me get a hammer. And I'm about to get my clamps. I should have gotten my clamps out ahead of time. All right, so that's down. There's the rubber side of the hammer. All right, that's getting me close on there. Now I'm going to use a set of clamps here. Let me see if these are long enough. Barely long enough. All right, I'm going to have 5 clamps involved in this glue up. I want to get the edges just right. So I've got the plywood sticking out from the bottom of this extrusion right here, so I'll be able to clamp both sides of it. And I want to make sure that it's square. So I'm looking at the reveal on this part of the clamp and the reveal on this part of the clamp. Make sure it's plumb and not squeeze real hard until I get some squeeze out right here. And I'm just going to work my way. I don't go one side in here. Because I may want to squeeze that glue out that way as I'm doing this. So I've got that piece right there done. Excuse me. All right, glue squeezing out. Going to the middle here. Trying to make sure the reveal on the clamp, edges of the clamp are the same. This is the middle thing. All right, that's working. Come up here. Make sure that my reveal is right here. Press down, squeeze up. I want that to be plumb. There's that piece, and there's the final piece right here. Looks like I've got squeeze out all along there. And I'm just gonna let it dry for 10 minutes, set my watch, and I'll take the clamps off after 10 minutes, and then I'll probably wait another 10 minutes before I try to cut this edge off and scrape the glue off. And then we'll do, I'm gonna use this router right here. This is just a portable battery operated router. But here's the neat thing. I've got this little thing right here where I can use that to make sure, since the router is going to be, the router table itself, the plate of the router is going to be sitting on that edge, it'll be tippy. Well, this keeps you from having to worry about tippiness because it holds it up against the plywood. I'll show you when I get ready to do that. I forget where I got that, maybe Infinity Tools or something like that. But it is one handy little thing and quite helpful for situations like this. And I'll clean this glue spreader up in just a moment here. But that's it, folks, on the glue up. The next phase will be, I probably won't show you cutting this edge off. It's really pretty simple. Just go over the table saw and get it cut right there. So the next step you'll see will be me using this router to do the flush trim. It is proud on both sides, just like I wanted it. The glue will be a little bit even more proud. That's why I want to kind of scrape it off before I do the routing on that thing. And then the final step will be a little bit of sanding with my sander, and we'll be done with that shelf. Okay, folks, we're ready to use this router, flush trim router, to cut off that excess that's beyond the edge of the plywood. Same thing on the back side. I'm going to use, I think, this side. I may use this side over here and use this like this, so that the dust comes over on this side. It'll cover me, but it will stay off the table. No, you know what? It won't work. This has got to be on this side. And the reason it does is because it hit the bottom of this is a little bit longer than this table. So this gives me clearance. So this is the side that I'm going to use. Now, let me show you a couple of things. It pivots on here, so this can swing away, so it's not touching. And then when I pull it over here, now it touches. But this is the closest I can get to that. So what I'll do is I'll come over here and switch around the other way, and we'll want to go actually that way anyway. So what I'll do is I'll start the cut about right here on the board backside, and then go this way, because this is going to be cutting against, it won't be a climb cut, it'll be cutting against the grain this way. And I think, and I'll be able to go all the way to here. Then I'll have to come back, and I'll switch to this side and cut the rest of this way, and that'll be a climb cut. Since you've got to have this having a purchase on the board here, and by the way, this has got a little flat spot right here, so that's what's riding against it, but it swivels, and so I'll hold this tight against that plywood as I'm cutting. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut this direction. That's touching the oak right now. So I'm going to hold this right here. I'm going to pull it away from the oak so I can turn it on, and then we'll start cutting. Okay, so what I was doing at the end, you saw I had a climb cut going this way, and it kind of grabbed it and threw it a little bit. I do have a little bump right here, and I don't know where that came from, but I think the sander's going to have to take that out because it's flush on this side and flush on this side, but it probably tilted a little bit when it grabbed that router when I was doing the flush trim bit. So I'm going to switch it around and have the same orientation except the opposite side. And we'll do the same thing this side. That's a good clean cut, except for right here. Is this the bottom side or the top side? This is the top side. Looks like over here. So good that this is the bottom side because that's where that little gap is right there. I've got the splinter came out of the plywood, and it did on this side over here too. But anyway, that's the rough side of the plywood, so to speak. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start right here, fairly close to the edge of this thing, and I'm going to do the regular cut all the way down. I'll have to flip it at some point before I get to the end though. Good. Alright, that is one handy little jig right there to go on that. So now, just a little bit of sanding. I've got this a nice flush cut on this side, a nice flush cut on this side when I cut those off on the table saw. And typical for the way oak looks, but anyway, I'm pretty happy with that, and I'll have to rip the back side of this off again to get it the right depth for the shelf. These sides should be square, but they won't be seen. The side, so I don't mind having the plywood edge showing up on the back or the sides because they will not be seen as when it's on the shelf pins that are inside the cabinet. This is the only part that will be seen, that front edge right there. So, and this is going to be the finished side. This is the side that'll be up. And I do have to do some sanding right there. You know what? Yeah, I'll have to do some sanding right there to get that down.